Okay, so we are going to start with the tale of Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there and was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail were good little bunnies, and they went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces, and then some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. He is having a good old time. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But around the end of the cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? And Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran faster on 4 legs, and went faster so that he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately ran into the gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on one of his jackets. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by friendly sparrows who flew in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Since Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop on top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot, and he began to turn them over carefully. Peter looked under each, and presently Peter sneezed, "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. He tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out the window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Lucky Peter. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was damp from sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stones, carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, the little Benjamin bunny. He went back down towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard a noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered under the bushes. But presently, as nothing had happened, he came out and climbed upon the wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions, his back turned towards Peter. and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down there very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could, straight away. Behind some black currants, Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and shoes for the scarecrow to frighten off blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home in the big fir tree. He was so tired he flopped down on the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not doing very well that evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea and gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end.